Joining me on the program now, geopolitical commentator Geoffrey Miller. Geoffrey, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Good morning, Andrew. Always a pleasure.
Beijing always puts on a big show, I suppose, but this was, certainly in living memory, one of the biggest so far in terms of who was there and the types of deals or alliances being made.
Yeah, it was a huge week in China, and in terms of the pictures, they've been beamed to our television screens and on our social media feeds. There've been some amazing images that have come out of this week. So there were two separate events. There was the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that was held in a port city roughly near Beijing called Tianjin. At the start of the week on Sunday and Monday. And that was the summit that Narendra Modi attended. And you saw those images. I'm sure some of your listeners saw them. Narendra Modi of India, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping all huddling together. And that's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, is quite security focused. It's kind of the security focused counterpart to the BRICS. The BRICS is the more economic focused, but equally on the global south, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That's the BRICS acronym, but it's a bigger grouping than that now. And the same goes for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's been on the expansion march over the last decade or more really, and now includes India as a member. There are a number of observers and dialogue partners. So that was big enough. But then we moved to Beijing for this military parade for the 80th anniversary of Japan's surrender to China. In other words, the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II and Victory Day parade. And it was one of these massive military parades that only an authoritarian state really like China can do. I mean, it of course seems familiar to us that if you think of the big parades that you see in Moscow every year for Victory Day in May, it's very similar to that. Well, North Korea has these kinds of big parades, but just an absolutely choreographed display of military might, all the latest weaponry that China has to offer, intercontinental ballistic missiles, underwater drones, fighter aircraft, you name it. And they were all there perfectly marching in time across Tiananmen Square with quite a number of leaders in attendance, but mainly from the global south. And that was the theme of this week, the global south and China's leadership. Or projection of leadership of the global south. It was really quite fascinating.
Just wanting to focus in on the parades briefly, because it was a very impressive parade. And look, I wasn't counting floats or missiles or tanks or anything like that. However, it seemed a lot more impressive than either the one we saw in Russia early in this year. And of course, Russia's on a hiding to nothing with the loss of hardware with the Ukraine war, but also a lot more impressive than what we saw for Trump's birthday in the United States. China really saying, hey, look, we are a force to be reckoned with. And, the North Korean leader, as well as Vladimir Putin, in attendance there.
Indeed, it was very much about China showing off its latest and greatest toys. And China has just got so much economic clout these days. They've got the ability to build these weapons that can keep up probably with the best in the world. The likes of Russia and North Korea, we know what their capabilities are, and they're not insignificant.
No.
They do have plenty of nuclear warheads, and they've got plenty of weapons, and Russia is on the march in Ukraine at the moment. They're gaining territory, so let's not write off the likes of Russia and their abilities. But they don't have in the end, the financial wherewithal to really foot it with the likes of the United States in terms of that direct head-to-head competition. And when it comes to the laser defense technologies, when it comes to these new ICBMs that were on display, and I think that's what Western military analysts were looking at, what was really new there, and it seems that there was a new type of intercontinental ballistic missile was the big takeaway from that. But of course, this is what China wants the world to see, and that's why you parade them, and that's why countries do this. They want to project power, and you had that parade in Washington a couple of months ago for Trump's birthday. It was more nostalgic than anything. It had a whole lot of World War II era weaponry and vehicles and things going along. I think the US projects its military power, though, in many other ways. And
Hmm.
if you think of aircraft carriers going around the world, all the US military bases, that's all about projecting power. So I think, the big military parades, it tends to be more of a non-Western tradition, at least in recent times. But in the end, it's the same purpose. It's all about projecting power and showing that you're a force to be reckoned with.
And also in amongst the military parade, Chinese troops that are part of the UN peacekeeping forces as well. So not just saying we are a military superpower, but also saying that we are an agent for stability and peace. This clear signal of China positioning itself as the leader of the global South, certainly a massive sphere of influence geopolitically. Do you think they successfully communicated that, or is it all a bit smoke and mirrors?
Well, look, the current dynamics are very much playing into Xi Jinping's hands. He's hyping up multilateralism, and that is in opposition to Donald Trump's view of unilateralism,
Yep.
really, and US dominance. And this is, I mean, you look at those images of Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, in Tianjin at that summit earlier in the week, close with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Why was he there? Why was Modi there? And why was Modi so keen to be good friends and best friends in a way with these two? Because Donald Trump has put 50% tariffs on India.
Yep.
India is facing the biggest tariffs in the world at the moment from the United States. Even China's only facing 30% at the moment, and we know Donald Trump's views on China.
Yep.
India is meant to be on the friendly side with the West, is meant to be kind of on the Western side. You think of arrangements like the Quad, which has the US, Japan, Australia, and India, and joint military exercises. We've sort of become accustomed that India wants to be more on the Western side because they want to be a counterweight to China,
Yep.
and they see themselves as a rival to China. But then Donald Trump is come in this year and he's really annoyed India. He's put these big tariffs on India to punish India, by the way, for its buying of cheap oil from Russia,
Yep.
discounted oil, as a result of the sanctions that Western countries like the US have placed on Russia. And so India's getting a cheap deal, and Donald Trump has come in to punish it by putting these tariffs. But in the end, he sent Modi into the hands and sent India into the hands of China, who are only too happy to welcome them into their embrace. And Xi is talking now all about the need for multilateralism to support the UN, as you say,
Yep.
UN peacekeeping, all of these things. I don't know. I mean, I think China wants a China-led world order
Yep.
in the end. They want a different world order. I mean, I think multilateralism, yes, but it will be on China's terms. In the end, China is a great power, just like the United States is a great power. They have different interests to the United States. But I think this week, really, you saw what the alternative was to a US-led world order. This is kind of it, I think.
Yeah, this is the new world order that people have been speculating about for some time, perhaps. Interested with the warming of the relationship between India and China. Of course, these are massive nations, particularly in terms of population and global influence, but they also share a border, and there's been disputes and perhaps direct conflict at times over the years. All that is now in the past because there's a great trade deal for oil, perhaps, with Russia, who is also part of the family.
Yes, look, there was a big border dispute, it was quite a bloody one back in 2020, the COVID year in the Himalayas between China and India, and relations got very bad very quickly. And that also explained why India went into the Western embrace quite strongly after that, and particularly under Joe Biden's uh, term as president. But they seem to have patched up their differences, or at least, agreed to disagree. And there is talk now that there will be direct flights again between India and China.
Yep.
They haven't been for years because of those disputes. And as you say, they're neighbors. So that will be quite something when there are direct flights again between India and China. But just the symbolism that you got this week, they are clearly willing to talk, and they're annoyed with the United States. I mean, in the end, this was the big audience of these events this week. Donald Trump was intended very much as the audience, and he was watching, and he again sort of played into their hands by typing out on his Truth Social account saying, give my regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un
Yeah.
as you conspire against the United States of America. That was directed to Xi Jinping, and that really just showed that Donald Trump was indeed triggered by the events this week, and I think that was very much the aim. So maybe it was all very successful from Xi Jinping's point of view.
I mean, overly, for the most part, generally successful, very well choreographed, gave the right messages. Why don't you talk briefly about New Zealand's involvement with this? Because in some ways, no surprises of what happened and the messages that were sent. What I was surprised about, two former prime ministers to New Zealand in attendance at this military parade each from different sides of the House. I was very surprised to see Helen Clark and John Key attending this event.
Yeah, look, it was very interesting, and New Zealand participation was very interesting. So apparently New Zealand ministers were not invited to the event, which seems very understandable, given that Xi put the focus very much on the global south, and the leaders he invited were mainly from Asia, former Soviet republics, Africa, that was the focus. Officially, New Zealand's representation came from New Zealand's embassy in Beijing, but the New Zealand ambassador, Jonathan Austin, to Beijing, he had found other things to do this week and had gone off to support a speaker's delegation. Jerry Brownlee was leading a delegation to Mongolia.
Okay.
So the New Zealand ambassador was off in Mongolia, and that was deliberate, as I would understand it. And apparently other Western ambassadors did the same. So they found other things to do, were out of town. So that meant New Zealand's official representation was at a low level from the embassy, pretty much as low as you could get in diplomatic terms. But then New Zealand had this unofficial representation by Helen Clark and John Key, who were invited as guests of honor, as former as statespeople, as former prime ministers, former leaders. And China invited a number of leaders. Now, there were quite a few Westerners involved. There were former leaders of Romania, Italy, I think Belgium were on the list. There were quite a number. A former Japanese prime minister was invited as well. So they weren't alone, and I think it was a good thing to go, by the way, for John Key and Helen Clark. And I know that everyone will have a different opinion on this matter, but I think it is good to engage. And John Key and Helen Clark were very much from the glory days, the golden era, if you like, of relations between China and New Zealand. Relations are still good. Are still very friendly between New Zealand and China, because in the end, China is New Zealand's biggest trading partner, and New Zealand absolutely needs China. And there is a good working relationship. Christopher Luxon was up in China in June, for example. But it is true that the relationship was probably even better back in under John Key and Helen Clark. And the Chinese ambassador to New Zealand sort of tweeted words to that effect, saying, this was from some of the best years of the relationship when you had John Key and Helen Clark. Those weren't the exact words he used. I'm paraphrasing there, but he did put out a post on social media sort of reflecting on that aspect, which I thought was interesting. And I think it was good on balance for Helen Clark and John Key to be there. They were not officially representing the New Zealand government, but they were representing New Zealand in the end, because they are former New Zealand leaders. And I thought it was good that there was a bipartisan element to that, not just Helen Clark from the left, but also John Key from the centre right. I thought it worked quite well, and they got a good handshake with Xi Jinping there on Wednesday, and I'm sure many of your listeners saw that as it was broadcast here on the television news that night. And
I think for some of us who are going, oh, well, hey, this has happened. What does this mean? What does this mean for us going forward in terms of the complexities of the relationship between the USA and China? But hey, this is a bit of a wait and see situation. Jeffrey, appreciate your time today. Thank you for your wisdom, your analysis. Thanks for being on the program today.
You're very welcome, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the REMA studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.